"Sir, I can make your daughter walk again," said the beggar boy to the millionaire. What happened next brought everyone to tears. The name Richard Mitchell graced business magazine covers and economic columns with almost irritating frequency. Founder and CEO of Mitchell Corp., a multinational headquartered in Los Angeles with branches on 4 continents, he was synonymous with success, rigor, and discipline. A man whose expression never wavered, cold, precise, lethal in business. But no amount of money, influence, or corporate genius could fix what truly mattered to him: Alice. 2 years earlier, Richard's only daughter, then 10 years old, had been in a car accident. A reckless driver, a misjudged curve, and in the blink of an eye, the once joyful, dance-loving child lost the use of her legs. The verdict was brutal: permanent paraplegia. Richard refused to accept it. He hired doctors from the United States, Switzerland, and Korea. He subjected Alice to groundbreaking therapies, stem cell treatments, robotic rehabilitation machines. He paid for experimental sessions at private clinics where the bills exceeded what most people would earn in a lifetime. He bought time, hope, and promises, and in return received only silence and disappointment. Alice, once full of life, was now a shadow in her room. Her smile had vanished like smoke, leaving only the echo of a laugh the whole house seemed to have forgotten. That morning, the two of them had just left yet another disappointing consultation. The neurologist at the prestigious hospital had repeated what every other doctor had said. "I'm sorry, but there's no progress. Her condition is stable." Richard clenched his fists as if he could punch the diagnosis until it changed. Alice said not a word. Her wheelchair glided almost silently down the corridor, pushed by her father. It was rare for him to attend appointments. He usually sent his private nurse, but something had compelled him that day. Outside the hospital, among the luxury cars and suited drivers, stood a boy. He looked 11 or 12, his skin bronzed by the sun, his bare feet dirty, clutching a tattered backpack older than he was. He stared at Alice, not with pity, but with curiosity, intense curiosity. Richard ignored him and steered Alice toward the car. "Sir," the boy said calmly, "I can make your daughter walk again." The businessman stopped in his tracks. He turned slowly, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "What?" "I can help her," the boy repeated. "For real." "You think this is a joke?" Richard's voice was hard, threatening. "Do you know who I am?" "I do," the boy said without flinching, "but that doesn't matter." The security guard approached, hand on his radio, ready to remove this intruder. Richard raised a hand, pausing him for a second. He was about to send the boy away when something broke the silence, something he hadn't heard in months. A small, tentative sound, a laugh. Alice. She looked at the boy, and in her eyes there was a forgotten spark. As if, for a single moment, a tiny flame had been rekindled, one the pain, time, and despair had tried to snuff out. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice weak but curious. "Noah," he answered, "and I know how to make her body remember." Richard watched them both. Every rational fiber in his body screamed to give orders, call the police, drive this delusion from his daughter's life. But there was something in the boy's eyes, a calm certainty he hadn't seen even in the most expensive doctors he'd hired. "Is this some kind of trick? You want money?" Noah shook his head. "I want nothing. I just need 1 hour." Richard held his breath. Why was he hesitating? He who never tolerated interruptions. He who commanded others' time, now frozen before a street kid. "Dad," said Alice softly, "can we?" It was the first time she'd asked for anything in months. Silence stretched on for long seconds. In the background, the driver opened the car door. The guard shot a warning look. The whole world seemed to urge him to say no. But Richard Mitchell, the man who never backed down, simply nodded. Noah smiled, not arrogantly but gratefully. "Thank you, just let me try." And in that instant, Richard knew something had shifted. He didn't know what or why, but the mere act of allowing it was a step. And steps, he knew, could lead to unexpected places. The iron gate of the Mitchell mansion swung open slowly, as if hesitating to admit what was about to pass through. On the other side, barefoot, wearing the same worn clothes from the day before, Noah walked with determined steps. He carried no backpacks or bags, only a small black stone wrapped in a dingy cloth, held in his hands like something sacred. Richard watched him from the veranda, arms crossed, expression hard, as if he could change his mind at any moment. Alice, for her part, waited alertly, sitting upright in her wheelchair. For the first time in ages, she didn't look numbly apathetic. "1 hour," Richard said as soon as the boy entered. "That's all you get." Noah nodded, neither thanking nor flinching. "It'll be enough." The main hall had been turned into a makeshift little temple. Alice was seated in a large armchair, surrounded by pillows. The curtains were drawn, muting the daylight. Noah calmly asked everyone to leave the room, including Richard. "No," countered the businessman firmly. "I'm staying." Noah didn't argue. He simply walked over to Alice and, with surprising gentleness, knelt before her. Holding the black stone in his hands, he said, "This is just a symbol, a point where the pain concentrates, but it's also where healing can begin." Alice studied the object with curiosity. It was smooth, with a small crack running through it. Nothing impressive at first glance. "Close your eyes," Noah instructed. "I need you to go back to the day you first learned to walk." Alice hesitated, then obeyed. "Remember your first steps?" Noah continued. "Feel your feet touching the cold floor, your knees trembling, the fear of falling alongside the determination to keep going." Silence in the room grew almost tangible. Alice's breathing slowed. "Visualize the ground. Feel the floor beneath your feet. Now imagine a strength rising from within your body, not from your muscles, but from your memory." Noah gently moved the stone along her legs, from knees to ankles. It was an almost ritualistic gesture, but unhurried, without show. "The pain that remains is like this crack in the stone," he said, "but that also means you still feel, and if you still feel, there's still a way." Alice frowned, eyes still closed. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. I felt something." Richard took a step forward, his heart racing. "Where?" "In my feet. A tingling, like they're waking up." Noah let out a quiet smile. There was no surprise in it, only the certainty of someone who knows his purpose. "It's your body remembering. Your body hasn't forgotten how to walk, Alice. It just fell asleep." She opened her eyes slowly, and for the first time in a very long while they weren't empty. There was light, curiosity, hope. "Is this real?" she asked, looking at her father. Richard tried to keep his composure, but something inside him was breaking. Something old, buried under layers of skepticism and pain. "I don't know." Alice turned to Noah. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Noah looked at her, and his eyes shone with something rare, gratitude. "If your father allows, I'll come back." Her eyes shifted to Richard then, as if pleading for a chance, a sliver of faith. He paused for a few seconds. He was about to say no, to protect his daughter from disappointment, to shield himself from embarrassment. But then he saw it, the smile. It was different from the one she'd given at the hospital. This was full, genuine, like a piece of the old Alice returning home. "You can come back tomorrow," Richard said, his voice husky. Noah nodded, placed the stone back in its cloth, and stood. "Thank you." As he walked away, the mansion seemed less cold, less sterile, and inside Richard's chest, a feeling long forgotten began to stir. Not faith, not yet, but perhaps curiosity. Richard Mitchell was not a man who accepted the inexplicable. Since he was young, he'd learned that behind every miracle there was logic, and behind every logic, someone manipulating the variables. Nurse might indeed have caused an improvement in Alice, but Richard needed to know why. And above all, he needed to know who this boy was. The morning after the second meeting between Noah and Alice, Richard summoned the same private investigator he'd used to handle corporate blackmail and unruly politicians. The investigator raised an eyebrow at the request. "A street kid?" "I want everything," Richard said. "Real name, birthplace, where he's been, everything." 2 days later, Richard received the printed report, sealed in a black envelope. He opened it with steady hands, but inside, a strange anxiety was growing. Full name, Noah Bennett Lee, born May 12, 2012. Parents, Jessica and Alex Lee, died in 2019, cause of death, traffic accident, collision with a vehicle from the Mitchell Corp fleet. The world stopped. Richard reread the information 3 times, the date of the accident, the driver's name. It all matched. One of his own employees, an alcoholic repeat offender, had left the company headquarters drunk, killed a couple, and gravely injured the child in the back seat. Richard vaguely remembered the case, a legal nuisance, as they'd called it at the time. He had ordered them to settle it, and they did. They paid the maternal grandmother to drop any lawsuit. They bribed 2 police officers. They silenced the local press. The employee was fired and sent to a private clinic for treatment. Case closed. Noah had been 5 years old at the time, and he survived. The report continued. The grandmother died a year later of a stroke. Noah went through 3 orphanages, all with histories of neglect or abuse. He ran away, lived on the streets in Bras, then downtown, begging for food, getting beaten, hiding from the police. During that time, he suffered a fall that damaged his knees. He couldn't walk properly for months, until he crossed paths with George Foster. Richard remembered the name, an eccentric doctor who'd made headlines years before talking about healing through activation of bodily memory. He'd been expelled from the medical board, ridiculed by the scientific community. But apparently he took Noah in, treated him with unorthodox methods, symbolic objects, visualization exercises, an almost shamanic philosophy of mind-body reconnection. Against all odds, it worked. Noah relearned to walk. Over time, he left George's care and returned to the streets, but now with a purpose. Richard dropped the papers on his office desk. He leaned back in his chair and covered his face with his hands. That child he'd almost run off his property was a victim of his own omission. For a moment he thought of confronting him, telling him he knew, asking forgiveness. But something held him back. Noah didn't know, at least he never mentioned it. And there he was, helping Alice, without rancor, without demands, without expectations. Richard stood up, crossed the hall toward the window. Outside in the garden, Noah and Alice were laughing. She was trying to move her toes again, and the boy guided her with a patience no physical therapist had ever shown. It was like witnessing a miracle being born, and knowing it only happened because that boy chose healing over vengeance. Guilt gripped Richard's chest like a red-hot iron. He could buy hospitals, topple governments, but he couldn't erase what he'd done, nor did he deserve what he was receiving now. Still, he said nothing. He locked the report in a drawer and tossed the key into the roaring fireplace. Whether Noah would ever forgive him was a question for time to answer. For now, Richard simply watched, silent, motionless. As outside, the impossible began to unfold. The iron gate of the Mitchell estate opened slowly, as if hesitating to admit what was about to cross its threshold. Beyond it, barefoot and wearing the same worn clothes from the day before, Noah strode with determined steps. He carried no backpacks or bags, only a small black stone wrapped in a grubby cloth, held reverently in his hands. Richard watched from the veranda, arms crossed, his gaze steely, as if he might rescind the invitation at any moment. Alice, in contrast, sat alert in her wheelchair, watching with bright eyes and straight posture. For the first time in ages, she did not seem numbed by apathy. 1 hour, Richard said as the boy entered. That's all you get. Noah simply nodded. No thanks, no flinch. It'll be enough. The main hall had been transformed into a makeshift sanctuary. Alice was seated in a big armchair, surrounded by pillows. The curtains were drawn to dim the daylight. Noah calmly asked everyone to leave the room, including Richard. No, Richard insisted firmly. I'm staying. Noah didn't argue. He walked over to Alice and with surprising gentleness knelt before her. Holding the black stone between his hands, he began, "This is just a symbol, a focal point for the pain, but it's also where healing can begin." Alice examined the object with curiosity. It was smooth, with a single crack running through it, nothing remarkable at first glance. "Close your eyes," Noah instructed. "I need you to go back to the day you first learned to walk." Alice hesitated for a moment, then obeyed. "Remember your very first steps? Feel your feet touching the cold floor, your knees trembling, the fear of falling, tempered by your determination to keep going." Silence fell so heavily it felt almost physical. Alice's breathing slowed. "Visualize the ground, feel it beneath your feet. Now imagine a strength rising from inside you, not from your muscles, but from your memory." Noah gently pressed the stone against her legs, moving from her knees down to her ankles in a slow, ritual-like motion, unhurried, unshowy. "The pain that remains is like this crack in the stone," he said softly, "but it means you still feel, and if you feel, there's still a way." Alice furrowed her brow, her eyes still closed. In a low whisper, she said, I felt something." Richard stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Where?" "In my feet. A tingling, like they're waking up." Noah let a small, knowing smile play on his lips. "It's your body remembering. Your body hasn't forgotten how to walk, Alice. It was just asleep." She opened her eyes slowly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they held light, curiosity and hope. "Is this real?" she asked, looking at her father. Richard swallowed hard, his voice caught in his throat. "I don't know." Alice turned to Noah. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Noah looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "If your father allows, I'll be here." Her gaze shifted to Richard, pleading silently for a chance, a sliver of faith. Richard paused for several long seconds. He was on the verge of saying no, of shielding his daughter from potential disappointment, of protecting himself from ridicule, but then he saw her smile, full and genuine, unlike the tentative hint at the hospital. "You can come back tomorrow," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Noah nodded, wrapped the stone back in its cloth, and rose. "Thank you." As he stepped outside, the mansion seemed less cold, less sterile. Inside Richard's chest, something long dormant began to stir. Not quite faith, not yet, but perhaps curiosity. The Mitchell mansion, once governed by silence and rigid routines, had become a field of invisible forces. On one side, Alice, growing more alive and stronger by the day. On the other, whispered voices in the halls, doubts, apprehensions, and thinly veiled accusations. At the center of that web of tension stood Margaret. The housekeeper had served the family for over 20 years. She'd cared for Alice since infancy, knew every corner of the house, every move her employers made, loyal, strict, devoted, and deeply suspicious of the newcomer who was upsetting her order. "Just a street kid, Mr. Mitchell," she said one evening, on the verge of indignation. "No known background, no family, no education. He comes into this house and starts touching your daughter, treating her as if he were a doctor." Richard, seated at his desk, didn't lift his eyes. "Alice is improving." "But she's being manipulated," Margaret insisted. "You're vulnerable and he's taking advantage. Maybe he already knows who you are, what your company did." Richard finally looked up, cold, cutting. "Be careful what you say, Margaret." She didn't back down. She knew her employer was torn, and that weakness was where she decided to strike. Quietly, she began gathering information. She spoke with long-time staff, sifted through archives, asked questions of contacts downtown. In less than a week, she had something in hand, a plain brown envelope sealed with no return address. She left it on Richard's desk with a note. "This is what he doesn't want you to know." That night, when everyone was asleep, Richard opened the envelope. Inside was a new dossier, more detailed, more damning. It showed Noah in his rawest form, a scrawny, dirty kid caught shoplifting, thrown out of group homes, arrested on security camera footage, confined briefly in a juvenile facility, and then escaping. The images portrayed a vacant stare, nothing like the calm light now in his eyes. Attached were comments suggesting Noah was a born manipulator, a child who'd learned to wield compassion as a tool, and now saw in Alice and in Richard the opportunity to secure a place for himself. Richard sat there for minutes, the dossier on the desk, his hands on his knees, his gaze fixed on the glowing hearth. He could end this right then. One order, and Noah would be gone from the mansion in minutes, protecting his daughter, acting with logic. But there was something no report, no suspicion could account for: faith. Not blind faith, but the kind that rises when you watch someone change a life through nothing but dedication and courage. Alice was smiling again, sleeping better, asking to go outside, even dreaming, and all because of Noah. No, those papers might reveal the past, but they didn't explain the present, and they certainly couldn't undo what his own eyes had witnessed. Richard picked up the envelope, walked to the fireplace, and with a single silent motion tossed the papers into the flames. He stood there, watching them burn away, as though every shred of doubt needed to vanish completely. The next day, Margaret sensed Richard's silence as an affront. She pressed her case again, this time hinting to other staff that Noah had ulterior motives and that Richard was blinded by guilt. Whispers spread, sidelong glances, veiled remarks. But Richard was on the other side now. "If anyone under my roof questions Noah's presence again," he told the staff, "feel free to find another job. As of now, he's as protected as my daughter." Noah never learned of the dossier or the rumors. He only noticed certain faces closing off as he passed, but he carried on, steadfast as ever. The difference was, now he had someone in his corner. Richard didn't just tolerate him, he trusted him. And in that house where fear once ruled, a new kind of authority was taking root, the authority of shared faith. The afternoon sun had barely filtered through the living room windows when Alice let out a scream. Noah dropped the black stone immediately. She doubled over in her chair, eyes squeezed shut, her breath coming in short, staccato gasps, as if something inside her was tearing apart. "Alice!" Noah rushed to her side. "What's wrong? My legs, they're burning like they're on fire." Richard burst into the room, nearly knocking down the door. He saw his daughter bent in pain, her hands clamped tightly to her thighs, tears streaming down her face. "Someone get the doctor, now!" Within minutes, Dr. Stephen, the family's trusted neurologist, arrived carrying his silver medical case, his white coat pristine, his brow furrowed. "What happened here?" he asked, as he checked Alice's vitals and administered a mild sedative. "Tell me exactly what you were doing with her." Noah opened his mouth to speak, but Richard answered first. "We were in the middle of a visualization session." Dr. Stephen turned slowly, his gaze like steel. "This is reckless. You're tampering with processes you don't understand. She could have had a seizure or suffered serious neurological damage." He fixed Richard with a hard look. "I warned you, this boy is a risk." Even under the sedative, Alice opened her eyes. Her voice was weak but urgent. "No, he was the one who made me feel again." The doctor ignored her. "Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, exposing your daughter to this unsupervised alternative treatment is endangering her life. I demand, as her clinical guardian, that it stop immediately." Richard said nothing. He stood motionless, staring at Noah. The boy kept his head low, hands clasped, like someone awaiting a verdict. In the days that followed, chaos erupted. News of the incident leaked, perhaps by one of Margaret's allies, and within hours, gossip sites and health column writers were screaming headlines like "Billionaire entrusts daughter to street healer, she collapses." The backlash was fierce. Richard was accused of negligence, charlatanism, reckless desperation. Renowned physicians called for investigations. Medical boards demanded explanations. Amidst it all, Noah disappeared. For 2 days he was nowhere to be found. Alice cried, refused her meals, and her progress visibly regressed. Richard scoured his contacts, reviewed security footage. Nothing. It was as if Noah had vanished into thin air. On the 3rd day, the boy reappeared at the mansion gates. His clothes were filthy, his eyes red from travel, and perhaps from weeping. "I left because I thought it was best for her," Noah said, standing before Richard. "But if you'll let me, I want to keep going." Before Richard could reply, a voice rang out from inside the house. "No!" Alice, still in her chair, was crying out loud, tears falling in torrents. "Don't send him away. Please, Daddy, don't do this." Richard looked from his daughter to Noah, and in that instant, his decision struck him like lightning. "Come in, Noah, and from now on, no one will remove you from this house. Not the press, not the doctors, not any threats." Dr. Stephen opened his mouth to protest, but Richard cut him off. "You have my respect, Doctor. But here, I'm the one who decides, and I've decided my daughter's treatment continues, with faith." The doctor pressed his lips together, grabbed his case, and strode out without looking back. The next morning, the mansion's gates were closed to the media. Lawyers were engaged and official statements issued, and inside the house, Noah sat once more before Alice, the black stone between them, the hush of respectful vigil, hope still intact, and this time there was no hesitation in Richard's eyes. He had made his choice and was prepared to face whatever consequences lay ahead. The silence between Noah and Dr. Stephen was thick as concrete. For days they avoided each other, even though they shared the same house. But Alice was there, between them, insisting on continuing with both of them, and her will was law now, her body still fragile, her mind stronger than ever. "If you both want to help me, then learn to work together," she said one morning. The idea of collaboration arose from necessity. Richard gathered them in his library and spoke firmly. "Noah, you have sensitivity, but there are limits that must be respected. Dr. Stephen, your science is vital, but you need to make space for what reason has not yet understood." Neither answered. But that afternoon, Noah didn't use the stone. He merely watched as the doctor applied motor stimuli. Later, Dr. Stephen did not interrupt when Noah asked Alice to close her eyes and visualize open fields, childhood running barefoot, the sound of grass under her feet. And so something new began, an unlikely symphony. Every day, Alice progressed. First it was her toes, then her ankles, then the calf muscles that trembled at the slightest stimulus. The doctor used equipment to measure electrical signals. Noah used stories, tales of courage, of falling and beginning again. Both worked. Dr. Stephen, by nature a skeptic, didn't voice the change, but the way he looked at Noah had shifted. His gaze, once accusatory, was now inquisitive, curious, even respectful. Noah, for his part, began to listen. He jotted down tips, imitated the doctor's muscle work techniques. He respected the protocols, the two of them, united by something greater than ego, Alice. Richard watched it all with held emotion. It was like seeing two worlds collide, and from the impact, something he never imagined could exist was born. Hope sustained by evidence, faith supported by technique. Until the day finally arrived. The sky was clear. The mansion's garden was bathed in the first rays of morning sun when Alice asked to be taken outside. She wore a light blue dress, her hair in a braid. Her eyes shone with almost childlike excitement. "Today, I want to try something," she said. Richard, Noah, and Dr. Stephen stood there, and so did Margaret, the staff, even the gardener. No one spoke, they only watched. Noah positioned Alice upright, her hands gripping the support bar the doctor had installed days before. She trembled, her legs barely held her weight. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded and took a deep breath. Then she let go of the bar. For 3 seconds, she stood, unaided, unsupported, wobbly and unstable, but standing. When her legs gave way, Noah caught her before she fell. Yet no one moved for several heartbeats. Time seemed frozen. And then, tears. Alice wept. Richard did too. Margaret covered her mouth in shock. The doctor discreetly wiped his eyes. Noah only smiled, as if he'd always known this day would come. Richard stepped forward, knelt before his daughter, and gently embraced her, tears in his eyes. He looked at Noah, then at everyone gathered, and said, "Today, my daughter took her first step, not because of doctors nor money, but because of a boy who had nothing but faith." The silence broke into applause. Not a boisterous celebration, but one of recognition, as if everyone there understood that something immense had just happened. The mansion, once a fortress of silence, had become a house of miracles, and the greatest one was only beginning. The sound of each footstep was light, almost imperceptible, but for Richard Mitchell, every step Alice took that morning thundered in his chest. She was crossing the living room on her own, the very same hall where, months before, Noah had held his first session, where Richard had stared at him with suspicion, and where Alice wouldn't even dare dream of standing again. Now she walked, a short distance, her steps still trembling but determined, real. Richard could not hold back his tears, but in that moment, it wasn't just the physical miracle before his eyes that moved him. It was the secret that had come to light in the days before, one now searing his conscience. Noah knew. He had always known. Richard discovered it by accident during one of the late-night sessions when Noah left handwritten notes on loose sheets of paper. On one of them, a single line read, "He doesn't remember the accident, but I do." Richard's blood ran cold. The next day he confronted Noah, expecting anger, reproach, outrage, but the boy simply said, "I knew who you were from the start. I knew what your company did. But Alice, she's not to blame. And you deserve to learn to walk again too." Richard felt his world collapse. For the first time in his life, he knelt before someone. He begged forgiveness, his words choked, his heart laid bare. Noah just held him. "I didn't come to punish anyone. I came because I knew what it was to lose everything, and yet rise again." That night, Richard made his decision. Days later, before a judge, with lawyers, prosecutors, and official paperwork, he declared publicly, "I wish to adopt Noah Bennett Lee as my legitimate son." The headlines changed. From scandal to redemption, from criticism to compassion. But none of that mattered as much as what had changed inside the house. Noah was no longer a guest. He was part of the family. Alice called him brother. They shared books, secrets, and plans for the future, and Richard, more human than he had ever been, did something new. He listened, not with the haste of a CEO, but with the patience of a father. That morning, as Alice crossed the hall, Noah waited for her on the other side with a smile. Richard watched from his armchair, tears in his eyes. Margaret, the housekeeper, stood quietly in the doorway, a handkerchief in hand. When Alice reached the center of the room and paused, steadying herself, it was she who spoke. "Today, I walk with my own legs, but what carried me this far were your arms." Noah took her hand. Richard rose and embraced them both, and there, in that tight circle, a greater miracle revealed itself. Because the true miracle wasn't just Alice walking again. It was Noah finding a home. It was Richard finding forgiveness. It was life, harsh and unpredictable, allowing 3 broken hearts to become whole. And, as if the world needed a single sentence to capture it all, it was Alice who said it, looking into her father's and brother's eyes. Sometimes the real miracle isn't learning to walk again. It's someone believing in you when you no longer can. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.